welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be doing something a bit different on my channel. I've decided to start my own original tag. As far as I know this is original, I did search to see if there was anyone who has created something like this before, and I wasn't able to find anything. If you know of anyone or a channel who's done this before, please let me know in the comments down below. I'll be sure to link them in the description down below. But as far as I'm aware, this is an original tag, and I'm gonna call this the Personal Canon Tag. Now, we all know this idea of a literary canon. It's like the classics books, the books that can stand the test of time, that are often taught in school. And the most popular literary canon is probably the Western canon, but there are canons from all over the world. And also, I believe, and why I started this tag, is that there is a canon for each individual person. Books that have shaped who you are, your individual personal culture, that have created the person you are today. And I want to give us a chance to talk about those books because I feel like the fast pace of BookTube is like read the new releases, talk about the most recent books. And while backlist books are being read, we don't really get a chance to talk about them, especially childhood backlist books. So I wanted to create a space where you can talk about the books that you believe played a significant role in your life and making you who you are. Now, these rules are flexible, but the general outline is that you can name 3 books in each time frame of your life, starting from before you could read for yourself. So the first 3 books should be from the time frame in your life when maybe your parents read to you, family members read to you, you couldn't read for yourself. Now, of course, if you weren't reading at this time, you can skip this, but these are just the general outlines that if you've been reading your whole life, these are kind of the time frames you should aim for. The next block of time is for when you were able to start reading by yourself, whatever that age may have been, when you could pick up a book and start reading it, without the assistance of others. What books impacted your life at that time? Then the next section is late elementary school or early middle school, junior high school. What were you reading at that time that shaped who you were? The 4th section, I'm going to allow for people to create 4 or 5 sections from this. For me personally, it's going to be lumped into one, but this is high school and university. I wasn't reading so much in high school. I was much more focused on other things, sports, friends, other things at that time. So I was doing, of course, the required reading for school. But the time when I started finding more joy in reading again was in university. So for me, I'm going to lump these 2 time periods together into one, but you can separate it into a 4th one for high school and a 5th one for university if you so choose. Now, if you're in high school or university, that might be the end of your personal canon video. That is also totally fine. But for those of us who are a bit higher in age, me being 29, I've read books since then. So the last section available is the 3 books that you feel have really impacted you the most in recent years. Now, I'm aware that if you do 3 books for each of these time periods, you're going to end up with 18 books. So that's quite a lot to talk about in a video. So don't be afraid to split this tag into 2 videos if you so choose. For me, I'm going to go ahead and do it all in one video and just talk very briefly about each book. So just to summarize, this tag includes 3 books from each section of your life that you find was significant to the development of who you are today. If you started reading later, skip the first couple sections and only talk about the last couple sections. I will be sure to put in the description the different sections of life that I just talked about, but feel free to cover the ones that you think are significant to your life. I've had this idea for a really long time, and I wanted to film it in the States because a lot of the books that I'm talking about I have physically in the States and I could, hold them up, but I don't have my childhood books with me here. So we're gonna have to deal with pictures being popped up on the screen, but either way, these books were very significant in my life. So let's start with the phase of my life before I could read. So this is when my parents would read to me. Now, the first book that really popped into my head here was The Lupine Lady. Now imagine my shock and surprise when, throughout making this video and the research here, I realized that the actual name of this book is Miss Rumphius. Now, I always knew the main character was named Miss Rumphius, but we always called it The Lupine Lady, at least as far as I remember.
when I was a kid.
Now, I was very blessed to have parents who read to me all the time and always supported my love of reading, even when I was super, super young. But the first book that really stood out from the crowd and popped out to me when I thought about this was The Lupine Lady. Even looking at just the cover of this fills me with nostalgia, with warm, cozy feelings of reading this with my mom. This book is about a woman called the Lupine Lady. If you don't know, lupine is a flower. And she just walks around spreading lupine seeds wherever she goes. And also spreading kindness wherever she goes. And this is about her life, her story, how she came to be doing this. And it's such a beautiful story. Like, I really wish I had this physically so I could reread it, but the art in here also just fills me with this soft sense of nostalgia and comfort. And this book really shaped me into who I am today, because I think it instilled in me some really key values of kindness and spreading that, regardless of whatever your environment may be. You can always make that better by your actions. The next one is The Polar Express. Now, my family has a tradition of reading this book every single year on Christmas Eve. And we have the literal tape of this. I'm dating myself here, but the actual tape of this is still in my house, and we would put it in the little tape player, and we'd have to flip sides halfway through, but we would listen to it every single Christmas. And I will be continuing on that tradition to my kids in the future as well. But this book is about the magic and the joy of belief, of holding something near and dear to your heart and believing in it with all that you have. And I've carried this message with me throughout my entire adult life, and I'm just so happy that I was exposed to a book that could teach me that at such a young age. The next one here is very niche, I believe, and that is Permit Drab the Hermit Crab.
Yet again, imagine my shock and horror when I realized that this other childhood favorite was not called what I thought it was called. I had no idea that the title of this book was Does Anyone Know Where a Hermit Crab Goes? All I knew is that I requested Permit Drab the Hermit Crab from my parents, and they read it to me.
Now, I don't remember exactly what this book was about, but I remember it was about a hermit crab, and I remember a very key line from this book, which was, Permit Drab the hermit crab lived at the edge of the sea. He crawled on the ground and he ate what he found, and he lived just like you and me, I think was the final line there. And I loved this book. I don't remember, like I said, the details of it, but I remember that I loved it, and then I asked my parents to read this over and over again. So I can still picture the cover very clearly in my head. So even though this doesn't really have a message that I've carried forward in my life, clearly my young self had some kind of imprint on this book. And bless my parents, they read it to me as many times as I asked. Now, I'm going to break my very own rules in this first one, okay? Which is why I said these rules are flexible. But I'm going to add a honorable mention here of a book that imprinted on me in a negative way when I was a child. And that is The Worst Baby Monster in the World.
Hey besties, voiceover Taylor back yet again to admit that apparently I didn't know any of the actual names of any of the books that I read when I was a kid. This is not called The Worst Baby Monster in the World. This is called The Very Worst Monster. Yeah. Apparently we just had nicknames for everything, and I believed it.
So my parents they fucking loved this book. And like I said, I came from the age of tapes, so you could get like basically audiobooks, but via tape from the library, and they loved this book, and I hated it. I hated the way it was narrated. The voice creeped me out. I didn't like any of the characters. It just gave me the heebie-jeebies, but my parents loved this so much that they would always get it from the library when we went, and then when I was stuck as a hostage in the back of the car, they would play this damn tape, and I would have to listen to it. So I hated this book. Maybe I would enjoy it now that I'm older, I don't know, but I just had to add this as an honorable mention that it's so stuck in my brain as a book that I despised, that I was forced to endure when I was young. Now moving up to the next section, which is when you're able to read by yourself, which is like early, middle, maybe late elementary school, depends on when you got into reading. You can kind of lump that time frame together. So for me, we're going to start with really, really early elementary school, and the first one is going to be Arthur. So I had a huge collection of these like large paperback Arthur books, and I believe that we actually had a subscription for them. Like I think my parents signed me up for a subscription, and I would get them every month, and I loved these books. I would devour them every month. And if my parents haven't gotten rid of them, which I don't think they would have, I pray they haven't, I had a very, very large collection of Arthur books. Don't remember any specific details from these books, but I know that I loved DW and Francine. Francine was goals. I loved those two characters. And I say, hey, what a wonderful kind of day. You can learn to work and play and get along with each other. Listen to your heart, listen to the beat, listen to the rhythm of the street. Open up your eyes, open up your ears, get together and make things better by working together. Oh, it just made my heart so happy. The other series from this same exact kind of time in my life was The Magic School Bus. So I loved science when I was a kid, I still do. And this book series with Miss Frizzle, you know, taking her class on adventures through the human body, through cells, through wherever, just made science so interesting, fascinating to me. And I remember just being really sucked into these books whenever they came out. I feel like there's a particular one that I really loved that was about like cells in the body, and they went into like a kid's body or something like that. Kind of like Osmosis Jones, if you know that video. There was a Magic School Bus about that. And I think that one I really, really enjoyed, as well as, if I remember correctly, there was one about bees that I really enjoyed as well. Now this last one from this time frame in my life is a bit later, when I was older, maybe late elementary school, and that was the Uglies series by, I believe, Scott Westerfield. This was when I was starting to get into like middle grade, like books that weren't kids' books that I was reading on my own. And I remember that this series just hit me so strongly. I would read it. I read a lot of this, I think, in car rides to and from my grandmother's house. It's about 6 hours between my house in the States and my grandmother's house, and we would often go there. And I just have this very distinct memory of reading like maybe 2.5 of these books in the series during that car ride, which I don't think I could do now because I get car sick, but props to my younger self. But I remember these books having a really large impact on me. This series follows, I believe, a collection of main characters, but one main girl character. And the first book is called Uglies because when you reach a certain age, don't remember what that age is, but when you reach a certain age, you are able to get this procedure, basically a plastic surgery, that turns you into a pretty. So until you reach this age and can kind of elevate into pretty society where they just have parties all the time and live a glamorous life, you live a normal life where you're ugly, you know, and you don't meet the standards of that society. And this book really explores that idea of beauty standards and societal standards, and mixed with magic and lots of, you know, young YA or middle grade tropes. I haven't read it since then, but I remember that this really impacted me and I loved it with all of my heart when I first read it. Entering into phase 3, middle or junior high school. Now this for me was my weeb phase, okay? I was very lucky to have gone to Japan when I was way younger in elementary school with my dad for his job. So I had been exposed to Japan and Japanese culture and had kind of already, you know, fallen in love with the idea of it and the feel of it and the nature of it. But in junior high school is when I really was exposed to the world of anime. And I was like, what is this? And it just blew my mind. So the first anime that I still love to this day and will go to my grave loving is Fruits Basket. This is a delightful shoujo manga series about a high school girl named Toru, whose mother passes away and she's left to live with her grandfather. But then through some circumstances, she can't be at her grandfather's house for a period of time. So she tells her grandfather she has somewhere to stay, but actually she ends up staying in a tent in the woods. Because she's very Japanese in the sense that she doesn't want to trouble other people. She's all about not causing issues in other people's life and being polite. So in order to not trouble people, she stays in a tent in the woods. Now, it just so happens that her tent is on the land of a classmate, a fellow classmate of hers named Yuki Soma. Now, Yuki is seen as like the prince of the school. He's beautiful, he's talented, he's rich. But then when he finds her on his land, his family's land, he's like, hey, do you want to just stay in our house? We have extra space. And so she ends up staying with the extended Soma family. But the Soma family has a little magical secret that you discover in book 1 that has to do with the Chinese zodiac, and it is delightful. So delightful. It's found family at its peak excellence. I love the series so much. Like I said, I will to the day that I die. There's an old anime of it. Please, for the love of God, do not watch it. It's terrible. But they just recently did a remake, and that is doing the actual manga series justice. So if you want to watch it, please check that out. Really good stuff. The next quintessential series for me in middle school was Inuyasha. I still do love, even though, I haven't watched it for a while, I still have a very, very soft, tender place in my heart for this series. I loved it so much. For those who don't know, there are two younger genres of manga, which is shoujo manga and shonen manga. Shoujo is marketed more towards girls, although anyone can enjoy it, of course. The marketing is more towards girls, and shonen is towards boys. Now, I feel like Inuyasha, for a lot of girls my age, had the shoujo protagonist that allowed it to be marketed towards us, but it had the shonen action and world building. And so I know a lot of girls that were my age, like myself, who fell in love with the series. Basically, we follow our main character, Kagome, who is a normal high school student, and then one day she falls down a magical well in her family's shrine and ends up in feudal era Japan. And there she meets a half-demon, half-human character named Inuyasha. And there's this very special jewel from feudal Japan called the Shikon no Tama that can give demons extra power, and it can also transform humans into demons. So it's got a lot of power. A lot of people want it, especially yokai and monsters want this to level up their power. But that jewel ends up being shattered and scattered across, all of Japan. So Kagome and Inuyasha and other characters along the way have to go and collect all of these different shards in order to put it together and keep it safe. I know that this series has its faults. The number of times Inuyasha yells Kagome's name is just outrageous. But I still love it. It has a soft place in my heart, and I could rewatch it probably an infinite number of times. And finally, I'm going to bend my own rules again here and not go with a book, but I'm going to go with media that led me to the books and my obsession with the books, and that is the Lord of the Rings movies. Now, I committed bookworm sacrilege and watched the Lord of the Rings movies before I read the books when I was in middle school. I think I might have seen them the first time, actually, in late elementary school, but as soon as I saw them, I was hooked. I was obsessed. To the point where I wanted to be Legolas. And my father is so wonderful. One year for Christmas, he bought me a handmade wooden bow and arrow so that I could practice and work on the craft and kind of feel like Legolas. That was how obsessed I was, guys. The Two Towers became my comfort movie. I really couldn't tell you how many times I've watched it. It's on the same level of Finding Nemo. I've watched both of those an ungodly number of times. But I love the entire trilogy. And that is what spurred my eventual interest and just absolute love for the books as well. Moving on to section number 4, or 4 and 5, depending on how you want to break this up, high school and university. Like I said, I'm going to lump these together into one section because I wasn't reading so much for joy in high school.
Okay, quick amendment here. Something I want to point out is that Harry Potter is a series that I started reading before I could read. My dad would read it to me. And then as the releases came out, we would read all of them together, on the release date. So that series has been a constant throughout my entire life. It didn't really stick to one block of time in my life. And in high school, I was like religiously rereading it as a comfort read. So while I wasn't really exploring new books, Harry Potter was definitely the main thing that was my focus when I was in high school.
And talk about university. Now, my majors were linguistics and anthropology, so my major was not in classics literature or in English literature at all, but I started to develop or rediscover my love of reading, and there was this particular professor at my university who was just incredible at his job. He was amazing at teaching. He made reading just so fascinating and interesting, and the discussions that we would have was, oh god, he I wish I could remember his name right now. I'm gonna have to look it up actually on the university website because he deserves recognition, but he is so good at his job, and he really reignited my love for classics when kind of high school destroyed that, really. So all the books I'm going to talk about here are actually from his Victorian period literature class. I took more than one with him, but this was his area of expertise, and that's how I ended up reading so widely in this kind of genre of literature. But the first one I'm going to talk about is The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. Now, I don't remember minute details of this book as it was a long time ago when I read it, but I remember that I loved the experience of reading this book. It's considered by many to be one of the earliest detective novels and established a lot of the ground rules for the genre that exists today. Essentially, we have this disgraced army officer who served in India who comes back home with the gift of a large diamond that he has taken from where he was. And he gifts it to his daughter, don't remember, niece maybe. And she ends up wearing it to show it off at this party, and it goes missing. So this is about trying to figure out who has taken it, where has it gone, what is the mystery here. And I remember reading the end of this book, and it was just a very refreshing take on colonialism for that time. And I was very, very impressed by the mystery and the way it unraveled, and I remembered really enjoying Wilkie Collins's writing. The second book, well, actually poem that I want to talk about from this part of my life is We Are Seven by William Wordsworth. This is a poem about a little girl who is asked by a schoolmaster, which is like an authority figure for schools for young children, very bad schools in general for young children, that demanded obedience at all costs and conformity in religion. This schoolmaster asks a young girl, how many siblings do you have? And she says, including me, there are 7. Of course, this is poetic. It's in, poetic form. But the story is that she says, including me, there are 7. And he says, well, 2 siblings are dead by your own admission. So how many are you? How many siblings do you have? And she says, we are 7. There are 7 of us. And she is steadfast in her refusal to say that there are only 5 siblings. Now, this might seem like a really weird, odd poem on the surface, but actually, this is showing a young girl who is supposed to be the weakest of all of society, very strongly resisting the forces of societal pressure upon her. Because Victorian times had a very distinct view of what life and death and your place in those things should mean. And they were very domineering in making sure that everyone in society followed this idea to a T. And this poem is just such a beautiful representation of that resistance. And I also, in my life, have a lot of significance to death of a child. So this poem also really hit that part of my life very closely as well. And I just think it's a beautiful piece of art. Now, the last book in this section, we're actually going to kind of throw back to my super early childhood books in style by saying this is a book that imprinted on me in hatred, and that is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I hate this book with every fiber of my being. I understand the themes. I understand what it's going for. I get the subversive aspect of this book, and I still fucking hate it. I hate it so much. When I was reading this, every page was a slog, and I just wanted to throw it across the room. All of the characters in this book are horrendous. They're just terrible people. I wanted all of them to die, honestly. Like, I was like, my dream end for this is just for, I don't know, mass casualty. That would have made me the happiest. So I get this book, but I don't like this book even a little bit. I don't really remember the main premise of this, honestly. I think I blocked it from my brain. But essentially it's a bunch of really shitty people on a plot of land fighting over who's gonna get the land or who's gonna marry who. Something along those lines. Very Victorian-esque. Little honorable mention here to tack on to Wuthering Heights, which is Bleak House by Charles Dickens. This book was painful. It is so big and long and boring. And again, I get the significance. I know that this is one of the best snapshots of this time period in history that we have in existence today. And I understand the depth and breadth of it. Does not mean I enjoyed reading it. I read it once in my life, barely pushed through, and I will not be reading it ever again. And now we are into, for me, the 5th, for some people maybe the 6th section of your life, which is the most recent years of your life, whatever age you may be right now. What books have impacted you? Now for this one, the 3 books I'm going to talk about you have definitely seen on my channel. Obviously, I have raved about these at some point during the life of my channel, so none of these should be surprising, but here we go anyway. The first one is going to be Jade City by Fonda Lee. Now this book, I mean, I've read a lot of fantasy that I love, but this first book and the subsequent ones, but specifically Jade City, hit me in a place that was so core to who I was. The emotions, the feelings that this book got out of me, the way that I cared about the characters in this first installment in the series, had me crying in public. I yelled out loud multiple times through all of the installments of the series, but also in Jade City. I loved seeing the representation of Asian culture done so in such a nuanced and beautiful way from someone who clearly knows what they're talking about. As someone who is married to a Japanese person, a lot of those nuances came through beautifully in this book, and it has raised the bar for what fantasy can be for me. So Jade City has had a huge impact on my adult reading life in the fantasy genre for sure. To piggyback on that idea of revolutionary reads in fantasy, for me personally, would have to be the Stormlight Archive. Either The Way of Kings or Words of Radiance, probably Words of Radiance, but for the first in the series would be The Way of Kings. Because when I moved to Japan, I was reading, don't get me wrong, but I wasn't reading epic fantasy in the way that I kind of used to, or at the rate that I used to. And then I randomly picked The Way of Kings off the shelf at my library here, which whoever requested that book for the English section of my library, like, I love you, whether you still live here or not, thank you for your service. But I picked that book up on a whim, and I fell head first into the world that is Roshar. I became obsessed with it. I've talked before about how the Stormlight Archive was my introduction to Brando Sando, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. And honestly, none of his other series have hit me the way that this one has. And just the depth and the breadth of the world and how I can lose myself in it. Like, if I'm stressed, this series is something I can just dive into and forget that my world exists. And that's something that I think is very rare to find for your individual preferences in fantasy, and it should be appreciated when you have it. And finally, this is a very recent read for me. If you've been around my channel, you've seen me talk about it, and it's actually not fantasy. And that is How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino. This book was again one that I picked up on a whim. I saw it in the very small English section of the bookstore where I live in Fukuoka. And I picked it up, and I didn't really have any expectations for it because I didn't know much about it. It just seemed interesting and something I'd never seen before. And this book touched my soul. It blew me away. The way that Yoshino talks about human connection, relations, talks about the way that the world functions and how we as individual people can make that a better place or not by our individual actions, how life is a growing and learning process, and how to interact with people, how to grow with those around you, and how you are not a singular entity. Of course, we have individuality, we have our own lives, we have our own way of doing things, but humans are interconnected. And I think that the way that this book talks about it, it just touched my soul. I love it so much. I have a whole review of this on my channel. I'll link it up above and down below. If you haven't heard of this book, or if you've heard me rave about it and I haven't convinced you yet, here's another chance. Pick this up. I am begging you to read this. So that concludes the personal canon book tag. I know that this is a bit unconventional and that it doesn't have a list of prompts like tags usually do, but like I said, I'll be sure to link down below like the different blocks that I've put for a person's lifetime. And like I said, you can choose which ones work for you. You should do a maximum of 3 books per time frame, with a couple honorable mentions here and there. You know, you can bend the rules, like I said. But I would just love to hear what people consider the personal canon of their life. What has made you into who you are today as a reader, as a person, as someone who exists in this interconnected world of ours, you know? I tag literally anyone who watches this and wants to do it, but I'll go ahead and throw out some names for people that I tag. Yolene from Yolene Reads, Sophia over on Fantasy Book Addict, Katie from Brightness Katie Reads, Tammy from Tammy Tries to Read, Lana from Lore and Lullabies, Anne-Marie from Bookish by Nature, Deidre over on Shade Tree Reads, Monet from Lifeless Monet, TB from TB Kane, Sato from Satopine, Jessie from The Bookish Mom, Len over on Len Reads, Steve from Steve Talks Books, Lois from Locan Reads, Sam from Thoughts on Tomes. Literally anyone watching this video right now, consider yourselves tagged. I would love to see your personal canons. Please make sure to just let me know, maybe tag me, link me, some way to let me know that you've posted it, and I will be watching all of them. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. I'd love to have you as part of this community, and I appreciate it. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Jane!